Hi friend, David here from Learn Christmas Lighting, and today I want to talk controllers. So you may have seen, I actually right behind me here, I've got a controller sitting here, and it's a new one for me. So, I'm always watching the Christmas light space, right? And this year, more than before, we've seen a lot of people talking about the Kulp light controllers, and that's what this is. I've got here a Kulp K16A-B controller. The name seems confusing, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. And, I'd seen people talking about these for a while. And when I first saw people talking about them, it was like, okay, these make certain parts of a show easier, make certain parts of setup easier, are a little less expensive than a Falcon controller. But at the end of the day, the initial reactions that I read about these things were that they were more complicated to set up, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't want to have to deal with that. Fast forward, I had seen somebody write a few weeks ago, and they said, by far, I don't remember where this was, I think it was on Facebook. They said, by far, the Kulp controller is the easiest setup I've ever done, from first turning it on to making lights blink in X lights. And to that I said, I better look at these things a little bit closer so that I can bring you the best knowledge that I have about controllers. And so I did some digging, did some research, did some looking, and I liked what I saw, so I bought one. So let's look quick at the screen and talk about these things. So the Kulp controllers, for those who aren't familiar, Kulp, Mr. Daniel Kulp, is a X-Lights developer, as well as very active with the FPP software that many people use to run their shows, not to program them. That happens in X-Lights, but to actually run the show. Okay? And therefore, he came out with these controllers a year or two ago that I think are the next generation of Christmas light controllers. Because I love my Falcon, I love my F48. It's a great controller when we talk about controllers. But Mr. Kulp, Daniel, he just took the best things about the Falcon controllers, and apparently I was watching one panel discussion or one session from the virtual Christmas summit where he, first when he had this idea, worked with David Pitts, who makes the Falcon controllers. And David was very generous to lend his expertise to help design these things in a way. And so he took basically what's great about the Falcon controllers and kept that, okay? But then he added to it. And I really like what he's done here because I think he's designed controllers that are really good for the next generation of shows, okay? Let's talk about that. For one, the biggest thing people see when they look at these controllers is the cost, okay? They're less expensive per se than a Falcon controller. That's both true and not true because the options can be a little bit confusing. So in general, they are less expensive. But it's more about the feature set that you get that I think is interesting. And so you can buy them from kulplights.com, also from Wired Watts. Though I bought mine from Kulp Lights, and I want to show you why I did that because I think there's some definite advantages there. And one disadvantage. So, there's no disadvantages. The thing about the Kulp controllers that makes them different and slightly better, but also more confusing, is we'll just click on the one I bought. Actually, I have it over here. Is that they actually use for their processor, for the computer that runs the controller, the FPP software running on a small computer called a BeagleBone. Okay, you have the option when you check out to have it with FPP pre-installed on an SD card for literally the cost of an SD card. I mean, it's a little bit more expensive, but not much. And to have it pre-mounted on a BeagleBone black or green. Now, I did some research here, and I believe the only difference between the two that matters to us is that the green doesn't have an HDMI port for video output. I said, I don't need that. I'll save the 15 bucks. Okay. And here's what I like. This is why I bought it from Kulp instead of Wired Watts. I love Wired Watts. Ken's great. But the fact that, like, I'm not super technical, right? Like a lot of you guys, okay? And so I didn't want to, yes, I've installed FPP before and I've got videos on how to do that, but I didn't want to have to figure all this stuff out when I could just click a few boxes here, select some options and have delivered to my door, literally. literally. This controller placed together. So all I had to do to get started was, this is just a power supply and a power jumper between the two sides because I'm not running pixels on it for this demonstration. And then we've plugged in the network. Um, and so there's some really big efficiencies that are gained here when it's all together like this. The first efficiency that's really cool is that if something were to happen to the BeagleBone Green computer that's running this thing, I can just swap that out. I can pull the SD card out and put a new one in, and the software is completely redone. So if something were to happen, it gets struck by lightning, somehow it fails, you can switch that out, and it's not very expensive. Okay. Plus, you can buy them from other places besides just Christmas light vendors. You could probably get them overnight shipped on Amazon. Okay. Maybe same day, depending on where you are. The other efficiencies. I really like that most of these controllers that Kulp has, are either all long-range controllers, meaning they use the Falcon Smart receiver boards to output to lights. I really like long-range controllers. Or like this one, the K16A-B, it's a hybrid. It has both. Whereas with the Falcon, to get both local ports, short range and long range ports, you had to get these add-ons with ribbon cables, and it was just really confusing to know what you needed to get and how to configure it. With these, it's all in the box, and I really like that because, like for this option here, the K16A-B, okay, I bought this one with the thought in mind that I have a tree in front of my house on the corner that my wife wants me to cut down. And I didn't have time to do it this year, but I'm going to cut it down in the spring and then have the ability to put a mega tree there. Okay. And with a mega tree, with a lot of pixels in a tight space, I want the ability to have those locally controlled because it's generally more cost efficient than having a bunch of receiver boards for something that's, 5 to 10 feet of wire away from the controller. Right. So this I really dig because it gives me both. I can run that mega tree, but then if there's props, 25, 50 feet away from there, I can just run them off the smart receivers off this guy instead of my Falcon, which is really cool because then I only have to run one network line over to that side of the driveway. And now I've got 16 pixel outputs, that I've got on this guy, as well as the 16 long range outputs. Okay. What else is cool about these things? Well, I haven't fully tested it yet, but I'm going to turn it on here in a second again. It's got the ability, I know I'm just reading the spec, but it's got a real-time clock. So for FPP, that's always killed me, is the Raspberry Pi, I can never figure out how to get the clock right. When it turns off, it doesn't keep the time. So if you have a power outage for 2 hours, now your show's off by 2 hours. You have to log into it, reset the clock. It annoys the heck out of me. And I can't figure out for the life of me how to fix that thing. For those who are very technically developer-like oriented, that's probably simple for you. But for us, I read through things and I'm like, I can't figure this out. So it's built into the controller. There is a audio chip on there. And so like in the past, you can buy audio cards for the Raspberry Pis and people do that. Can you hear the difference? Yeah. But for me, I'm like, I don't feel like putting in the extra effort, having another thing plugged in and shoved into my controller box for, yes, a better sounding show, but most people aren't going to care or notice, in my opinion, that are watching my show. But it's built right in. So now it's like, okay, in my main box that I have up in my attic, I would no longer need to have this separate mini computer to run my show and to get the audio to the FM transmitter. That doesn't need to happen anymore because it's on board with this controller. There's actually another ability to add an FM transmitter onto this. Now, I'm sure it's not FCC registered here in the US. So, you decide whether you want to do that or not. I would rather stick with my $100 whole house transmitter that's FCC registered. But then again, if we look at court cases and precedents, the FCC really doesn't come after people with personal residential light shows. So, what do I like about this thing? Well, I've told you a lot about what I like already. You know, the only limitations really are that the only kind of pixels it can do are WS 28, 11, 12, et cetera pixels. But in the Christmas light hobby these days, that's the only type of pixel there are. Let me show you this thing. So I got it out of the box. Here's what I did. And I'm going to plug it in. And literally all I did was grab a power supply. And I wired that power supply up so that basically, you know, I've got power to each side of the controller. The right side over here provides power to the actual BeagleBone, the little mini computer that runs the show. The left side, from what I can tell, provides power to the controller and the screen. And so literally, I let this thing boot up. It's going to take a second. And I've placed it on my network. This is just on my home network. And it boots up. It's pre-configured. It's going to give me an IP address, and I'm going to be able to log into this in just a second here. So cue that Jeopardy music. Oh, we didn't even need the Jeopardy music. So it's at 192.168.0.154. Yeah. So we type that in to the old web browser here. Boom! We've got FPP. And so now at this point, there's a couple ways that I could set up my show. Okay. And this can be set up from X-Lights as well. So there's different modes that you're able to run this guy in. Basically, you can go in here and you can set this guy up to, and I'm blanking on which page here, channel outputs, I believe. You can set it up to be an ArtNet E131 SACN or DDP controller. Okay. So if you don't enable this, you'll be running your show off of this, and it will be treated as a non-networked pixel controller, basically. You write that, of course, it's coming in through Ethernet, that info. And then at that point, you can save this thing. You'd be able to configure it from X-Lights, I believe. You'd be able to, you know, set it up here, whatever you want. But there's also DMX ports on it. Okay, this is something I like. They are a terminal block type connector. And so instead of it being a RJ45, which was great on older controllers, using an Ethernet, a network cable for that, for the DMX, it worked well when primarily people were connecting to old LOR, Lightorama boxes, okay? But now I think most people that are using DMX in their show are using stage light type fixtures, which are going to use a 3 or 5 pin XLR type connector. And so putting here just a terminal block means you can just cut off the end of a cable, strip the wire, stick it in the terminals, be done. Okay. So I really dig that. And so basically, like, it's really simple and really good to get started. I'm going to keep testing with this thing, keep playing with it. But my initial impressions are that I really like this. And I think I'm going to start even recommending it above the Falcons. Like, you know, at the end of the day, you got to look at what's best for your display. But I don't see a lot of downsides with this controller. The one thing that is kind of weird about it is the depth. The fact that the computer, as you can see, sits on the back of it. And so it actually raises it for mounting in your controller a little bit. So you might have to get a little bit creative with some rubber feet or something like that to keep it off from smashing, you know, to keep it nice and level. But overall, like, it's really simple to get going with this thing. I was surprised because I thought, from all the talk I had seen online, I thought until recently that this thing was going to be kind of difficult to configure. Turns out it's not. You know, really, the Falcon, you know, it does have a few things. Like, for example, this guy, you know, the only network jacks on it are one network jack for your data and then the 4 for the receiver boards. So it doesn't have the network switch built in like the Falcon to be able to jump out to go to another controller. Then again, I don't love having network switches in the outdoors, just because, say it loses power, then your other controller would lose power. But then again, if it's an F48, that's a lot of your show probably. So if it loses power, you're going to want to remedy that situation right away. So hope you've enjoyed this video. It's an overview. I know it went longer than a lot of my videos, but I hope it gave you some idea onto what these controllers are, how they might have an advantage to you. And I'm going to keep playing with this thing. keep going on and configuring it, making sure everything works as it should. But I'm excited to get started with these as a really great option as a controller. Is it the right and perfect thing for everybody? Not necessarily, but I think it's worth a really good look, and definitely could be something that you may want to add to your show. If you like this video, head over to learnchristmaslighting.com. I've got a guide for you. The things you need to know, 3 things you need to know before you start your first Christmas light display. Grab it over there at Learn Christmas Lighting, and we'll see you back here on the site as long as you're subscribed. Thanks.